and welcome back to the lecture series on refugee migration diaspora. So today we are going to discuss the South Asian population and its understanding its dialectics with the multicultural Canadian society, and we are going to understand this dynamics, the presence of the South Asian in the Canadian multicultural society through the play The Komagata Maru incident by Sharon Pollock. There are many factors that are responsible for the migration of a given people, which include economic, political, and environmental factors, as well as family reunion. These different forms of migrations create distinct categories of migrants. So, when we talk of economic migrants, we are referring to people who move from one place to another in search of better economic opportunities. This migration is often directed from a less economically developed country to a more economically developed one, and from former colonies to the countries that were imperial powers. Some of the upshots include brain drain, labor migration, and post colonial migration. The second category of migrants include the political migrants. These are the people who migrate from their home country due to civil war or ongoing state policies that are responsible for the oppression, marginalization, or loss of liberty and human rights of a certain social group, as well as discriminatory treatment of particular groups of citizens. They often flee in order to escape persecution and to find safer, livelihood in other nations. So these political migrants are called refugees and asylum seekers. Next, we have environmental migrants who leave their homeland because of sudden onset events such as tsunamis, landslides, and flood events, as well as slow onset processes such as desertification and rise of sea level, basically due to as a way of averting or as a way of escaping natural disasters or certain change in landscapes or certain change in natural processes, change in the climate of a region or the natural factors. A population has to move to another part of the globe. Next factor is family reunion or reunification, also known as chain migration, which is a type of migration where a family comes to join at least one of the members who is lawfully residing in another country. So many a times we see that old parents migrate to stay with their children who are living and working in the Western countries. Similarly, a spouse, one counterpart travels and settles with the spouse who is working in the West. Marriage migration is a subcategory of family reunion. So, in marriage migration, the fiancé or the proposed civil partner or spouse or unmarried partners migrate in order to settle with their counterpart in his or her residing country. So, the many a times we see that the husband is working in one of the Western countries, and the wife has to travel and settle with him after the marriage. This is called marriage migration. In this regard, critic Harshita Yalamati notes that for a majority of women in India, marriage involves an aspect of special mobility in the form of local norms, as women are expected to live with their husband or with their in laws after marriage. However, such norms are not universally practiced. For Indian women, these local practices follow through the transnational marriages, which involve crossing national borders. In Canada, for example, in the year 2016, spousal migration from India constituted 21.9% of all migrants, and women formed 65.9% of this group of spousal migrant. This is the case with several other countries as well. There has been a rise in women's solo migration apart from marriage migration. Some of these women are traveling for study and work. However, they conform with the marriage norms in the host nation. To give an example, the character of Kamla that we see in the web series Never Have I Ever migrates to the US for her studies, for pursuing her PhD, but ultimately Kamla agrees to an arranged marriage according to her parents' wish. Scholar and critic Ranjana Sheel observes that South Asian male migrants in Canada are interested in brides who possess the qualities and qualifications to work after their arrival as immigrants. And this choice of a qualified counterpart is primarily due to two reasons. A, in order to mitigate or kind of defend the socioeconomic insecurities of Canadian job market, and B, to set up double income households, which actually is a continuation from the first point, that is to become more secured, more economically settled and stable in the host land. Thus, changing standards of women's marriageability seems to be determined in part by their suitability for immigration preferences and policies in effect at the time of migration. Although the multicultural policies in the current times seem comparatively more feasible and more fair and safeguarding the rights and lifestyles of different social groups, these same policies have not always been viable and equally fair for the family members of the primary migrants. So if we go back several generations, we would see that the multicultural policies in Canada were much more discriminatory, much more racist in nature, and the brunt of these policies had to be faced by the first generation of South Asian or colored migrants that were moving to the land for the first time. So these colored migrants would be known, there would be this hyphenated term, visible minority. They were visibly minor, they were visibly different owing to their brown skin color. And for the first generation that had moved to Canada several generations back, the multicultural policies were quite difficult at the ground zero level. So, three historical incidents, the Komagata Maru incident, the Grunwick dispute, as well as the Gate Gourmet dispute, all these three incidents evoke the discriminatory and racist treatment, as well as the poor working conditions and exploitative treatment faced by the South Asian migrants in multicultural societies, especially in Canada and in the UK. These incidents depict the othering of the migrants in Western nations, as well as the intersectionality and transnational feminism at play. They also point to the agency of the immigrants and the journey that they have traversed so far, down the decades, how far they have progressed in terms of, the rights and the alternative position that they demanded, the agential position that they demanded at that time. So, multiculturalism, instead of being an integrating force that incorporates all kinds of others into the mainstream, has to quite an extent, historically been responsible for assimilating and ghettoizing the visible minorities into discrete compartments. So rather than integrating them, it has been instrumental in assimilating and ghettoizing them into discrete marginal groups. At the break of the 20th century, a small contingent of 83 officers from the colonies of Hong Kong, Singapore, Rangoon, and Shanghai had passed into Canada, and a large bulk of them were Sikhs. They were the Sikh population traveling from India to Canada. They had insinuated through Victoria and were initially greeted with amity. The earlier settlers were very small communities who concentrated mainly in the region of British Columbia in Canada. However, the antagonism grew as these Indians, these officers started bringing in their families. As a way of checking this rampant infiltration, a hefty sum was imposed as head tax for each immigrant. This has been seen as a wily tactic played by the Canadian government, given that the government has very easily hired cheap labor force from highly populated nations like India, China, and Japan. So it was considered as a normal phenomenon that Indians, Chinese, and Japanese would come and work in constructing the railroads in Canada. However, when they brought their own families and wanted to settle in Canada, that was considered as a kind of violation of the national policies, and so a hefty head tax was imposed on each immigrant. The government was not answerable for the basic maintenance of the workers that have worked from the Asian countries in the Canadian land for building railroads. And as far as the Sikh population from India was concerned, their sense of loyalty towards Queen Victoria was exploited to a most excruciating degree. So the government wanted to be sure that the progeny of these Asians did not proliferate in Canada and subsequently compete with the white demographic population and kind of destabilize the demographic balance. Because the Canadian government found it justified that a non white would serve and die for them in the process of constructing their roads and rail tracks, but they would never live with them. So they found it as disagreeable that the Asians, the colored people, should come and live with the white population. So it is easy to understand that because the Canadian manual workforce was superfluous at the time when the Japanese freighter Komagata Maru had arrived in Vancouver, did they use inhuman tactics to prevent the boarders from disembarking. So at that time, Canada did not need any manual labor, they did not need any manual workforce, and so they prevented or they used inhuman tactics to stop the boarders of Komagata Maru from disembarking in Vancouver. On May 23, 1914, a steamship carrying 376 passengers, who were largely Sikhs, but also some from Hindu and Muslim sections, that arrived on the west coast of the Dominion of Canada. Based on the laws implemented to limit the immigration of Indians, Canadian officials declared the passengers as illegal, and consequently they were refused entry and detained for 2 months on the Vancouver Harbour. And following that, eventually this population from India was forced to depart for Calcutta. They were sent back to India. So the Komagata Maru incident is an iteration of the fact that the basic premise for operating multiculturalism should have been equality, or it should be equality, whereas in practice the lacuna lies when implementing these laws. When we on pen and paper, a lot of things might sound very fair and just and rendering equal treatment to all. However, in practice, the discrimination or the racist mentality shows. This is because it is a policy whose idea cannot be realized without the basic premises of democracy. Dialogue between different social groups is a potential sign of thriving progression and cultural dynamicity. And without this, multiculturalism as a policy crumbles and fails and collapses. So, Komagata Maru became a living marker of racism. It reminds, one of the racist policy that the Canadian government assumed while deporting the Indians back to Calcutta. So, Komagata Maru incident reminds the world about the discrimination that was meted out solely on the grounds of physical appearance and physical difference. In such a case, conformity to such racist multicultural policy tantamounts to complicity in violence. So, this historical event, the Komagata Maru incident of 1914, therefore brings back the issues of land claim, ill treatment of the colored people, as well as the politics behind paying head tax. So, based on this historical incident, playwright Sharon Mary Pollock has written a play named The Komagata Maru Incident. So, Sharon Mary Pollock was a prolific playwright, actor, director, literary critic, and cultural activist whose politically charged dramas attracted both national as well as international acclaim. Pollock began her theatre career as an actress. In the year 1966, she won the Best Actress award at the Dominion Drama Festival for her role in Anne Jellicoe's The Knack. Her first play, assuming an entirely female point of view, entitled Blood Relations, in the year 1980, won her a Governor General's Literary Award for Drama in the year 1981. So, Pollock has also written a number of notable historical dramas, including Walsh in the year 1973, the Komagata Maru incident in 1976, and One Tiger to a Hill in the year 1981. So, in her play, The Komagata Maru Incident, we see the central character Hopkinson saying, I quote, "My father did not die in the service for the world to be overrun by a second rate people," unquote. So, this statement itself is the concentrate of the racism that we are trying to critique and that we are trying to observe through this play. And this play is a critique of the Komagata Maru incident, like the title suggests. Another important character, T.S. Throughout the play, this character is called T.S. T.S. could very well stand for the system. It's not even a person, it could be the system, T.S. So, T.S., Master of Ceremonies, creates a carnival circus in order to reveal and revel in the political, legal, and racist skirmishes in the courts, parliament, and the street. His sideshow skills come into play as he manipulates and maneuvers the immigrant officer William Hopkinson, who is responsible for carrying out government strategy. So, T.S., the system, who is the master of ceremonies, is manipulating, everyone, manipulating William Hopkinson, and then Evie, who is the madam of Hopkinson's brothel home base, also Sophie, who is a lazy but ambitious prostitute, the character of Georg, who is a recent immigrant that is eager to get ahead, and finally a sick woman and child who are among the 376 men that have boarded the Komagata Maru ship. So, manipulations happening at various levels by T.S., Master of Ceremonies. And he's he's carrying out his maneuvers through William Hopkinson, right? Because Hopkinson is responsible for fulfilling the government strategies. Hopkinson is a half Indian, and so he's exploited in terms of his bodily features to spy on Indians. He is like a brown sahib, he's half Indian, so he has a similarity physical, in terms of physical appearance with other Indians, and he's exploited by the system to spy on Indians. So, this idea of espionage brings back to memory the regulation deployed by the Nazist bureaucracy. So, espionage is a process of controlling a population, it is a means of allaying the government's insecurity about potential groups that might be scheming against its perpetual rule. So, it's very Nazist in nature. The idea of spying on certain groups as a way of perpetuating one's own rule. That's part of any Nazist governance. So, being a hybridization of several identity, Hopkins epitomizes the gray zone, the liminal space, the trauma of a limbo, of being here and there, but being actually nowhere. So, Hopkins is reductive void who is neither a colonizer nor a colonized. He is a half Indian, but not quite a British. So, for the playwright Sharon Pollock, this stage where the play is being enacted becomes a piece of reality, which is both a microcosmic presentation as well as a continuation from the larger multicultural society. From the stage, from the lines of the play, through the lines of the play, Pollock is criticizing the larger policies of the Canadian multicultural society. So Hopkins, we see, is caught in the quagmire of mixed blood of Punjabi and English. And despite his urge to associate with the Canadian law and serve it faithfully, he becomes a subject of mockery, he becomes a subject of derision by the two sex workers, Sophie and Evie. So the women make fun of him because he is neither here nor there, and he is the despicable character of spy, right, that no one trusts. Then we see this character of the sick woman with the child, who is the only woman out of all the men in the Komagata Maru ship. The woman's character, along with her child in this play, reflects the South Asian ethos. And there is this deliberate stagecraft showing that TS, or the system, does not enter into her mode of living, thereby suggesting that the woman is outside the mainstream and she is confined in her own exiled condition. This nature of multiculturalism assumes a patriarchal tone of despotism while treating a single woman, a single mother who is torn away from the rest of her family. Her crisis, her incarcerated condition cannot be addressed by TS. TS is inadequate in entering her mode of living or in addressing her jeopardy. Further, we see that the repetitive specification of the people of Komagata Maru by an empty sign of numbers. So the playwright has very sarcastically used, empty sign of numbers, 376 immigrants, repetitively throughout the play, which is a vicious onslaught that reduces the borders into dehumanized, unsexed codes or ciphers. They are as if certain codes, certain numbers, without any name, without any homeland, without any history, without any culture. So the cargoes, humans, coals are all reduced into a common platform of excess. They are considered by the Canadian government as the excess, the outcast, the unwanted bloody Asians that need to be thrown out of the precincts, the geopolitical land of Canada. They have to be deported from Canada. Since racial groups do not exist in vacuum and they act as a category through oppressing other groups, they qualify as constructions and productions of a comparison in order to create a binary between the superior and the inferior. In plain words, racist groups do not exist in isolation, but they are replicated in terms of dialogues with others. So, only through dialogizing with others, they qualify through binary relations, they either become superior or inferior to the other social groups. So, we also see the function of panopticon here, a state apparatus that imposes itself onto a collective psyche through the agenda of hegemony. And this reminds us of the various aspects of Canadian multicultural policy that can be brought into question. So, through understanding the racist attack on the borders of Komagata Maru, by extension, we can also look at the other problematics associated with the multicultural Canadian policy, which can be extended, for example, to understand how the residential schools work, and also the working ambience in a Canadian society, as well as the alleged incompetency that is associated with the non white population, and the white Canadians' frustration with the racist and ethnic other. So, I mean, Komagata Maru incident becomes a microcosm that can be extended to understand larger Canadian multicultural policies and the problematic baggage that it carries in terms of residential schools, in terms of racist and biased workplaces, and the incompetency and frustration that is associated with the presence of the racial and ethnic other. So, Sharon Pollock's play becomes a manifesto that reveals these fragments of history as a way of pointing out the human propensity for racism. So, with this, we come to the end of our lecture today. Let's meet with a new topic in our next lecture. Thank you.